And we immediately move on to the second paper of this academic paper presentation round. It is Gatekeepers, Superstar or Disruptors, a study of rents in the digital industry. It is written by Sotiris Georgousis, a PhD economic researcher of the fourth year of the economics department of Bowman Heiden, one of the co-founders of the Dynamic Competition Initiative. Bo is the director of Center for Intellectual Property, executive director of the Tasche Center for the Management of Intellectual Capital at UC Berkeley, the co-chair of Technology Innovation and Intellectual Property NYU School of Law. A very long list, I have to read it out, I'm sorry. Yes, and then even time to write a paper, no? And the third one, Nicolas Petit, our very own joint chair in competition law at the EUI Law Department and Robert Schuman Center. Please, the floor is yours.
All right. Let's sit here. Maybe I can use this. All right. Some of you are getting nervous now, right? You're thinking they're not going to get done in time for the coffee break, right? Some of you wanted coffee from the beginning. You didn't get it. Now you're getting very nervous. But since I'm a co-organizer, I can make sure we get done on time. So we'll see what we get. Hopefully we'll make it to the coffee break right around 11. So you can relax on that, okay? Yeah, so I'm just going to go through a quick presentation of this paper done with Sotiris and with Nicolas on Gatekeepers, Superstars, and Disruptors. And one of the key things we'd like your help on, this is a work in progress, and the more we work on it, I think the more ideas we get. So we may never be done with this paper, but at some point in time you have to let it see the light of day. So it would be great if you could help us with some of these issues on conceptualization. So we're going to describe a little bit today how we look at the economic theory on profits and rents and how we break them up. We're going to talk about how we operationalized these theories and the hypothesis and tests. It would be good if you think comments on whether you think that was reasonable. The third one is implementation, and that's where we actually try to gather the data and produce results, whether you think the data that we used was able to actually be valid in relation to our operationalizations. And then, of course, there's some rationalization, which always helpful to get to see the light of day and get some constructive criticism. All right. So, first issue is the conceptualization. We try to move from a more traditional unimodal to a multimodal theory of economic rent. So economists have traditionally represented a normal return under the cost curve and treated everything above as abnormal monopoly profits or rents. We don't think that this negative, we think this is a negative connotation that for rent is unfortunate. Even Thomas Piketty observes that to use the word rent to denote an imperfection in the market, or more generally to refer to any undue or unjustified income, is not really the right way to think about rent, right? It's as if rent has become synonymous with economic ill. So we wanted to broaden this discussion from seeing everything that's considered to be rent as a monopoly rent that has negative welfare effects to look at a broader perspective, where, of course, monopoly rents is one type rent where it implies, of course, restriction of output and in turn deadweight loss. Ricardian rents arise from the expansion of output and when markets operate under conditions of allocative efficiency. And Schumpeterian rents require innovation, requiring long-term growth or implying long-term growth and dynamic efficiency. What's interesting is you could, if you replace the monopoly rent box on the screen with Schumpeterian rent, then would that be deadweight loss or would it be Schumpeterian investment? In other words, don't you have to invest in order to get innovation? So this is a bit of a static model. Even from this, it's not perfect. It should be more dynamic because with innovation, you're not only going to have different rents in the static sense, you're going to push out the demand curve, or also not only lower the cost, but push out the demand curve into a new period. So this almost needs to be shown dynamically to really show the impact. All right, so that's the conceptualization, and of course these three types of rents, we didn't make those up. Those have been around for a while, but we did try to conceptualize them a bit more in depth. You know, when you're reading the 1870 1817 book by Ricardo on rents, you know you've gone deep down into the rabbit hole, so it was good that we got out of there. And trying to expand it into a digital economy. So when we look for the operationalization then, for monopoly power, we're going to look at limited entry. We would expect there to be, people can control output, there would be limited entry, and we would see high markups or increasing markups with limited entry, right? When it comes to Ricardian rents, we would look for rent differentials between digital firms. We would look for rents that persist, even with increasing industrial output. And we would look for rent maintenance in the face of decreasing prices, because Ricardian rents is a cost effect, not a price effect. So just like with land, maybe in this region for wine, some is more productive, and as more outputs come on, the people with the more productive land benefit from the higher prices but have lower costs, right? And in Schumpeterian rewards, we're looking for firm-level differences in the levels of reallocation of intangibles through R&D and other procurements such as M&A. Yeah, sorry, I'm looking at my slides and doing it, so that's what I just said. All right, so let's get to the data. So first we test for entry, and so when we look at this is the U.S. Census Business Dynamics database. We find that from 1980 to 2020, the number of ICT firms has grown from about 20,000 to 142,000 firms, and that new entry went up, as you can see, before the dot-com, in the dot-com era, and has still been adding 15,000 firms steady per year since after the dot-com crash. So there's a lot of entry in general on this level of the industry. When we look at entry into sub-industries, you can see that it's mixed. So in data processing, it's gone up and down a bit, but still never getting below 400 new firms, and now up around 800. Electronic shopping and mail order has just continued to go up to adding 5,000 firms per year. And communication equipment is one of the only ones, when we look at this, is going down. And of course, we focused on these sub-industries in the areas of big tech firms in order to be able to have some type of limited scope on the empirical investigation. So if you throw the big tech firms, Google is in, Google, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Microsoft are in each of these different sub-industries, where you can see that Apple's is the only sub-industry where entry is going down and going down to very low levels. Even when the other ones go down a bit, they still stay at pretty high levels. So we have a lot of entry even on the sub-level where these big tech firms arise. And then if we add in the idea of markups. So now we combine in these graphs, so you have the total number of firms is the red line, and the blue line is the markup over the mean markup. So how much within their sub-industry is their markup greater than the mean markup? So Google's markup has moderately decreased with the number of market participants, while the number of market participants has increased. We see more clearly the maximum markup graph that has a pool of potential competitor increases that are entering firms that are either more productive or have a higher market power over specific products. So here we again are using this theory of potential competition. If there's a lot of entries, even though it might not be the exact same type of firm, there's an opportunity for more competition to directly influence. And this goes back to what Pierre was saying early on about companies, you know, when you look at Instagram or you look at Giphy, if you think that those are potential competitors, then when you see thousands of new entries, you think statistically there would be a company there that could compete in the future, right? So Google is only in the CR4 value from 2002 to 2010, so it's not even in the highest markup group after 2010. So for Apple, we see a clear trend where Apple's markups rise and above the mean and their maximum, all the way up to the maximum markup in the industry, and they stay rather high. So here we see this kind of correlation where it's possible that either Apple is some mega superstar or it does have a strong monopolist position in its sub-industry, right? So for most of the companies we see high markups, or at least reasonably high markups, or even increasing markups, but also lots of entry. But for Apple's group is the one where we see high markups and decreasing. So we can start to draw some conclusions from that. When we went to test for Ricardian rents, we wanted to use total factor productivity. The problem, of course, is that just like Salo realized many years ago that everything other than labor and capital is thrown into this, and you need to have a much more granular look to understand the differential or the inframarginal cost differentiations between the different firms. So when we looked at this, we saw that everyone's total factor productivity was decreasing, and decreasing against the TFP mean for each of the areas. We think that this is probably not the best way to look at this issue. In fact, it might, if total factor productivity would include almost any type of rent in the overall, it would capture any rent that wasn't related to specific physical capital, right, and labor. And because most of these firms in the ICT industry are intangible, many of the firms that enter in are only intangible. They only have intangible value. They have very few employees. What was it? WhatsApp was bought for $19 billion. It had 55 employees. That means before we get out of here today, we should create a $19 billion company. What do you say? Okay. So we'll get back to recording. Wasn't there any excitement on that? Just so that, it's the coffee. You haven't had the coffee. Is that it? All right.
Everybody has 19 billion.
Everyone has. It's nothing for everyone in this room. Yeah. All right, so when we come to the Schumpeterian rents, we looked at, well, we'll throw a few graphs up here, but we look at the idea of revenue, R&D to revenue, and intangibles to revenue. So how much are people procuring through their own R&D or procuring through M&A, because all the M&A goes onto the balance sheet and goodwill. And we look to see how much are they procuring. So you can see Google has a relatively high, steady rate of R&D. It also has a lot of intangibles for revenue, so it's procuring other intangibles from the market. And its markup its revenue per employee is going up, but also the number of entries are going up. So when you put all this together, there's a strong argument for Schumpeterian rents, that they are continuing to invest in R&D and that the markup given the entry is related to that they're producing innovation, better products and services. Apple, on the other hand, is more level, even decreasing to some extent, but still a large, I mean, they have a low percentage, but they have a very high revenue. So this is still a lot of money being put in to creating intangibles and creating innovation. But given that the revenue per employee has gone up and stayed very high, and the number of firms is going down, it's hard to argue that this would only be Schumpeterian. Again, you can't rule out monopoly rents. Facebook and Microsoft have a very similar situation as Google, so we come to the conclusion that Facebook, Microsoft, and Google in this case all show signs of having Schumpeterian rent that would explain why they have high markups with high entry. All right, so just a little bit of a summary then. So monopoly rents, possibility with Apple, Schumpeterian rents for Google, Facebook, and Microsoft, and Ricardian rents. We're pretty sure that companies that this large with such economies of scale and network effects are producing Ricardian rents. We just haven't been able to measure it, so you could see that if it's not monopoly rents and it's Schumpeterian or not Schumpeterian, it's probably Ricardian. So right now Ricardian rents is our residual, but we need to dig into that to understand it better. Yeah, so I'm ready to. One last point, I'll be done, I'll do it. One last point is we see that there should be, sorry, thank you. I can never play two keyboards at the same time. So the idea is that you don't just have one type of rent, you can have a mixture, a portfolio or a profile of different rents. So you could have some monopoly rents, some Schumpeterian, some Ricardian. And likely that this is going to go over time, right? So let's say you start out, you come up with a great innovation. Most of the rents would be Schumpeterian in the beginning. Then you become more efficient using first mover advantage, economies of scale. You become more efficient as competition comes in. You make profits because you're more efficient than others, even though there's competition and expanded output. And then in the end, maybe if you don't renew with new Schumpeterian investments, then you start to try to hold on to your market share. You start to take your rents could become more structural and more monopoly rent oriented. This is just one implication, but the idea that you could have a mix of rents and that they would flow over time. So in the end, our argument is, in the long, summoning Keynes, in the long run, all companies are dead, right? So what should we do in the mid to short term? What should policymakers do? And how can policy be crafted to enhance welfare given this multimodal rents? So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. We are right on time, and we will now have Alexis Walckiers from E.CA Economics, please.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me, for organizing this conference in this magnificent venue. I must say that you went maybe one step too far by bringing the Belgian weather here. I mean, that was not what I asked you, but still, I feel welcome personally.
You feel at home?
So thanks as well, for sending over your paper on Easter Saturday, was it? So I could know how to enjoy my holidays with the children in Greece. So that's
You're getting all the complaints out here first, aren't you, Alexis?
That was very nice, and actually I very much enjoyed your paper because it's very rich. It's plenty of ideas, and let me somehow, as part of this discussion, to somehow rephrase some of these ideas in my way. But thanks a lot. So basically, and this is somehow a disclaimer, E.CA, and well, I'm working on this EU study that draws a little bit on the literature of superstar firms, and so it's a dual disclaimer. One, it's not really my ideas here that I'm presenting. I'm commenting on your paper. And second, I might have a focus more on these superstar firms and on Ricardian rents as a complement. So I put, a number of things summarizing the paper here. So there are, three types of rents, and I'll get back to these. So innovation is Schumpeterian rents, the monopoly rents most of us know, and then there are these Ricardian rents, which I will discuss maybe in a little bit more detail, that are related to efficiency and to some extent maybe also to these superstar firms. And what you attempt to do is to disentangle this empirically, and so I'll discuss that as well. And I think, there are many good ideas in this paper, so I would really advise you to read it because it brings in some freshness, and I think it's more than welcome. And so, as Bo also said, this is work in progress, and so I'm commenting on an early version. So.
Disclaimer.
Exactly. So maybe we all know, to start with, we all know about these superstar narratives, but maybe I'll, just summarize it in my way so that, we are on the same page for the next slides. But so this idea of superstar firms was brought by a number of authors. The first one is Author, which makes it easy. So Author et al. And they have a couple of papers. And basically, their ideas build on, it's related to this increasing concentration and increasing margin discussion. And what they say is, one option to discuss that is that if you have firms that are distinctively more productive and that these firms attract a number of sales by being more productive, well, you have a driver of more sales, more market share towards firms that are more efficient and have therefore a higher margin. And so basically this higher margin, higher concentration, higher market shares could be drawn by these hyper-productive firms, which are these superstar firms. And as Benoit has said earlier, there are also discussions on, this paper, but I won't dive into that. But, the way they define markets, especially geographic market have been discussed. But let me not dive into this discussion about these superstar firms. But so this idea, the main idea is that you have firms that are more productive and they may drive actually the dynamics, the overall dynamics. And one of the questions is, what drives these firms to thrive now? And there are here a couple of explanations that have been explored. Author and his co-authors basically speak about this tougher competition now, and that basically enables these superstar firms to thrive, so, to take more of sales. And why would that be, this tougher competition? Well, because of technological change, globalization. Some people have more demand-side kind of arguments, saying, that due to technology we can move away more easily now than in the past. That those are, kind of pro-competitive stories. Besson has another story that is more related to IT, that would be, better used by bigger firms, and so that would be a maybe less pro-competitive story. But those are basically the narratives behind the superstar firms. Now, one of the questions, and I'm sorry that my slides have been eaten a little bit in the process. That's part of life. But so one of the questions is, how do you define these superstar firms? And that has an influence on the outcome. And basically, what you would have in this superstar narrative is that you would have big firms with a lot of sales that would be associated with profitability and profits, and all of that should be on the same line, if you want, because the story goes that you have more profitable firms attracting more of the business. And what I show here, and sorry, this becomes really an eye test, but so what I took is, this is the period 98-2002. You have here revenues and here profits, and the red dots are the 10 firms, worldwide with the highest profits. But you have here with the gold ring, you have the 10 firms with the highest revenues, and what you see is that there is some overlap back, in the days between profit and revenues. And if you take, and sorry, it becomes very small, but if you take it here in 2018, 2022, you see that actually very few of the big firms with large revenues, so these gold rings, are also firms that run the largest profits. And this somehow raises the question, coming back to your identification by looking at these big firms, which is a bit different from the superstars narrative to start with, of whether actually we are looking at the same firms, those that are the biggest and those that run the biggest profits. And we have done things on profitability as well, and we have different periods. But so the point is, you can look at this in that way. But so the basic question here is, should you look at profits? Should you look at revenues? I had a number of other questions about, whether you should look at that by market, or can you look at that by firms overall? And all of these on the definition of superstars, I think, are important questions that you may want to think through. Here I'll
fix your slide before I send it out.
Thanks a lot. This is maybe a little discussion on, now is the time, because it seems that, we have, over the last couple of years, policy people have been much more focused on these superstars, with this idea that, things have changed. And so I put a little quiz for you here I teach in a business school, so basically, they tell me that especially before coffee, to have interactions with people in the audience. But so I have put, and sorry, it's still somehow of an eye test, 2 quotes, and then the question is, how far back do these quotes come from? And so you have the first one says, while the operations in which a man exceptionally favored by genius and good luck can take part are so extensive as to enable him to amass large fortune hitherto unknown. And the causes of this would be the development of new facilities for communication by which men are enabled to apply their constructive or speculative genius undertakings to undertakings vaster and extending over a wider area than ever before. So, this sentence that somehow could have been, one of the narratives of Mrs. Vestager's, for instance, on the DMA, actually dates from 1947. It's Alfred Marshall in his Principle of Economics. All that to say that we have been fascinated by these superstars for a while. I'll let you read the second one, which dates from 81 and refers to this phenomenon of superstars that basically they saw us coming back in the days. Obviously, it's more than 40 years old and more than 75 years old now. So now, one of the questions is how long is it lastly, will this last? And there are 2 ideas that were brought to my mind when I read the paper. One of them is the role of low interest rates. For those of you who read the FT yesterday, they had a long article on, the Silicon Valley people going to the Gulf states to get money because there is not enough money left apparently in California. But so basically, the point is, how much of what we have known in terms of superstar firms was driven by this very low interest rate period that lasted for much longer than the previous ones. Relatedly, there is this question of globalization, and at an event in Brussels, Thomas Philippon, who is one of the main contributors to this literature, referred to the role of globalization. And what he said in essence was that if you take a firm like AT&T, was just as big as Apple was at the time where AT&T would be the biggest firm in the world, but they were only active in the US, whereas Apple was active globally. And so basically, the question is with the deglobalization that we know for the moment, with all the events that I will not remind you, political events that I will not remind you of, the question is whether these superstars are likely. Last
2 minutes.
slide. Well, that will be more than enough. I'll take 1 minute and give you 1 more minute for the coffee break then. Here are a couple of questions. So first of all, I like this idea of these three categories of economic trends, but it was not very clear to me how they interact. And so, I'm an old school economist. I like to have sometimes a model that summarizes what are the main assumptions, how you draw the line between one and the other. And it's not always easy for me to understand, whether these rents could be the same. So, say, are they mutually exclusive? So, say you have, as you said, they can evolve over time. Can they be overlapping at a given point in time as well? And so all of that are questions that I think you may want to explore. Second, the Ricardian rents, and so I put the two definitions you gave. So one of the questions is that the superstar narrative or not, and so maybe this is one of the questions you may want to explore. And second, there is this question also of differentiated prices. So how does it work when you don't have one price, but when you have many prices? Can a superstar firm discriminate more to the down? Is this something that they would do? Under which conditions? And so basically, I would also see reasons to explore these ones. If you discriminate based on proprietary data, which is typically what I understand that Google, Facebook, and others, the GAFAMs, do. Why is the fact that you're owner of the data related to Ricardian? So, Ricardo is, this idea of Ricardo is owning, so to what extent is that? And I'll leave it here. I could speak a little bit about the empirical strategy, but I guess that...
We can do that in coffee.
Exactly. Let's have coffee instead of...
We still have a couple more days with you, Alexis.
Thank you, Alexis. I think Bo still is willing to take 2 small little questions before we're heading to coffee.
What's that? Yeah, the quiz, the word hitherto gave away the first one, I think, in the first one.
Yeah, so what's the answer to the quiz? So the first one is Alfred Marshall in 47, and the second one is the superstar paper of Sherwin Rosen in 1981. So that's his... So the first one is more than 3/4 of a century old.
This is why I love historians, right? Because they always tell you that it's not as new as you think. Well, it looks like everyone wants to get, it was such a great paper and so clear, that's how I'm reading it. But I think everyone wants to go to coffee, so.
Thank you very much. We will reconvene at 11:30.